Welcome to Ask the Security Guy. I am Holly Magnuson, and I'm here with Shawn Kohrman. Good morning, Shawn.
Morning. How are you?
Doing all right. I'm going to give a few ground rules before I cut you loose here. You will notice that we now have a new chat window that is to the right of the video screen that you see, and you can ask your questions there. And there's also a link to a Google form where we ask the question, if you use any of the digital assistants, I guess was what we're calling them, Cortana, Siri, Google Now, and we'd love to hear whether you are using those and how often. So if you get a chance, go ahead and click on that link and we'll share the results as we go through today. And for now, Shawn, tell us, your thoughts about these personal assistants.
So, Holly, there's a when we talk about the Siri or Google Now or even Cortana, really what we're talking about is voice recognition and voice commands, or even speech to text. If you're doing, for instance, if you're not texting and driving, because that would be illegal, and I know none of our listeners do that. So, with that caveat out there. So things like speech to text and those kinds of things, or asking Google Now, what's the weather, where am I, how do I get home, or asking Siri the same set of questions. In addition to the application-specific commands that each one of these tools provides. So I've had a few questions that come my way, and people were asking, well, how does that even work, and what are the privacy considerations around it? Well, so Microsoft, Apple, and Google all provide privacy statements as it relates to their respective products. They're right up on the website. You can do a Google search for them. But don't follow. Apple's is actually the most clear, where they describe in some detail how they protect and anonymize the audible data that they collect from each of these mobile phones when you use Siri. So all three use a similar paradigm, and I'll walk you through how that works. So let's say you're using, for sake of argument, an Android device. And you start off and you say, okay, Google. And your phone perks up and starts listening. And then you tell it, what's the weather, or how do I get home, or, ask it a question. Normally what will happen is that phrase that you just recorded is uploaded to Google, processed for voice recognition on their servers. The result is then sent back down to the phone in a binary format that it can understand as a command. And then that command is then processed on the phone. The idea there is the horsepower required to do voice recognition is way beyond what your phone can do for general speech. But each phone, a Microsoft phone with Cortana, a Google phone with Google Now, or an Apple device with Siri, they all have voice recognition capability on the device itself, but it's limited. So there's a set of commands, upwards of 60,000 words that it understands, and that varies per device. Now, that's not uniform across devices, but that's a good example. And then if you're out of cell service range, you have no Wi-Fi, you're in airplane mode, there are some commands that it can recognize just by itself locally. Now, if you've ever played around with it and put your phone into airplane mode, for example, and then tried using voice commands with your phone, normally what you'll see is a bit of a lag in recognition, because now what's happening is your phone is relying on the phone's hardware itself to process the data, do the recognition, and then interpret the result. So when you're relying on the phone's hardware, there's going to be a bit of a lag there. But under normal circumstances, you can speak naturally to pretty much any of these devices now, and have that interpreted well. Not 100% accurately, because let's face it, we all have different inflections and tones and accents and all kinds of variables. So it's never going to be 100%, but you get pretty close. So then that leads, then to the question is, so each one of these companies now has voice samples from you.
Which is something I really hadn't even thought about until we got talking about this earlier.
Well,
so it's kind of creepy.
Yeah. So, and just, take a minute and think about that. Every time you use voice commands or speech to text or any of those tools that make life more convenient, audio samples of your voice are now uploaded to the respective company, Apple, Google, or Microsoft. So with Apple, what they do is they in their privacy statement acknowledge that they retain that data, that sample data, for 2 years. But after, I think it's associated with your account for 2 months, and then they completely anonymize it and keep it for R&D purposes for another 18. So it's fuzzy as to exactly what the exact timeline is there, but it's around 2 years. Google, on the other hand, if you go to, I think it's accounts.google.com/history, you can find all of your recent voice searches or voice interactions with your phone, if you have an Android device, and actually play back what it heard. And from there, you can choose to purge your history, or you can keep it, or you can adjust your settings so that it doesn't keep history. But you have that level of control with Google. With Microsoft, it's kind of a black hole. We don't really know how they store it, how they anonymize it, other than they swear up and down in their privacy statement that they do their best to protect you. And for me, that just left me feeling warm and fuzzy all over. I'm just going to turn on Cortana right now and have her start taking care of everything for me.
So I'm hinting that you don't trust Microsoft that much.
I appreciate it when companies are open about how they protect my data. When they're not, I worry.
Yeah.
I worry anyway, but I worry more when I don't know how they're doing it.
And just as a reminder, for those of who joined us a few minutes late, there is a link in the text box to the right of the video window that you can click on and tell us if you use. And that is anonymous. It's turned off. We won't know who submitted what. And also a place for you to ask any questions as Shawn talks about this. So go ahead, Shawn.
Okay. So that's kind of the privacy aspect of this in a nutshell. The voice commands that you issue at some point are going to live somewhere other than your phone. They're going to be in a data center somewhere in the world. If you're comfortable with that or not, that's your decision. But I think from a privacy perspective alone, it's worth knowing where your data is. Because the voice recognition and commands or questions that you've asked your phone are actually recorded and stored somewhere other than your phone. Now, if you do some searching around online for questions people that have asked, for instance, Siri, there's some interesting stuff out there, and stuff that I would seriously question having living somewhere else. But it does. So the caveat here, or the other angle to look at, is the security aspect of this. So increasingly what you see is, as functionality gets better and as voice recognition itself gets better, we're seeing more and more control of apps on our phones with voice commands. You can open different apps. You can even interact with some apps now. Strictly through voice commands, which is great. I mean, it's very convenient. I've even recently discovered banks that are using voice prints as part of two-factor authentication to log into the banking app, which is interesting because now the bank is keeping a voice recording of you, a sample recording, and they're using that as part of the authentication scheme. Which, I mean, it's something you have, something you know. From a security perspective, we like to see at least two factors, if not more, to handle authorization. And what we mean by authorization is, are you allowed to access this app, this service, or whatever? Authorization determines how much you're able to access or what kinds of data you're able to access. So authentication is the gatekeeper. So when we talk about this from a security perspective, the big gap or the big hole that's apparent is, can I circumvent the phone's security controls with voice commands? And the answer is yes, on all three. Now, it has to be in a specific context. On all three, you have the ability to turn off the phone listening for voice commands when the screen is locked. So if you have a lock screen enabled and a PIN code enabled, you can go into your settings for each of the specific ones and turn off that personal assistant, that digital assistant, when the screen is locked. What that means is when your screen is locked, it's not listening. You can say, okay, Google, or hey, Siri, or hey, Cortana, all you want, and nothing's going to happen until you unlock the device, and then it's listening to you and will interact with you. So if you have that setting enabled, or you've never turned it off, there's a risk, and it's been demonstrated. There's a number of videos on YouTube where you can see security researchers doing it, where they can step through voice commands on apps and then work their way into actual touch commands on apps and start getting access to your contacts, to your emails, to your photos, to access to your text messages. There's a variety of things that they can work their way into through that path. The simple way to shut it down, though, is to, one, have a lock screen enabled on your phone, and two, turn off the digital assistant when the lock screen is enabled. But as part of my preparation for the show, one of the things I stumbled across was a security researcher who had done something interesting, where they had mimicked on an Android device the OK Google and then a variety of commands. But they did it in a way where they used a voice modulator. So to the human ear, you couldn't understand what the sounds were. However, the phone picked it up and interpreted it and executed the commands. Now, what they demonstrated was that worked within a 10-foot radius. So 10 feet away, they play this sound, and the phone executes commands. And what they also were able to demonstrate was if those sounds were embedded in, say, a YouTube video, when they were played in the YouTube video, the phone would pick it up and execute the command still. So let's talk about this from a slightly different context. We talk about malvertising, basically malicious ads in websites, and how they can infect or load code onto a phone or a computer just by the very action of loading the web page, loading the malicious web page. Think about issuing a command in that tone that you as a human can't hear or understand, but that your phone can. And it goes to a website, loads up, the bad code, and off you go. Your phone's now compromised. Now that can be done audibly through some type of voice command. It can be played, or it can be embedded in a video. So it's food for thought. Now the simplest way to catch that is, if your phone's unlocked, chances are, or hopefully, you're using it. So you're going to see the confirmations pop up. You know, hey, you asked me to do this, so I'm doing it. So you'll be able to interact with the device and stop it there. But again, if you don't have at least those basic controls enabled on your phone, it's just yet another form of attack.
Which I'll put my 2 cents in here. Even if you don't use Siri or Google Now or any of those, having that PIN code is just so important to protect your phone.
Yep. And that's a great point, Holly. Just because you don't use it doesn't mean it isn't enabled. So check your settings. If you don't use it, turn it off. If you've done a software update recently, double check that it's still turned off. If you haven't checked your settings on whether or not it's listening behind the lock screen, please do. The software support for each device has very detailed instructions on how to do that. I double checked, went on all 3 websites this morning, and they have it right front and center if you do a search for it. So that's the caveats there. I mean, you've got privacy and security to consider with these types of voice commands. So really, at that point, it's up to the user to make an informed decision and really adopt. And you know, when we talk about PIN codes and the lock screen security, just good practices.
Most definitely. Well, we have had some people fill out the form so far. 50% of them use Siri. One person, we had 4 people so far. So if you're still listening, you can fill out the form. There's a link at the top of the chat. It's still visible, it appears. And we've got one Google Now, 1 Siri, or I'm sorry, 2 Siris, 1 person who doesn't use it. Another one that was mentioned in the chat is Amazon. They now have the Echo, I believe is what it's called, the Amazon Echo, that does the voice recognition on a bigger scale in your home.
Right. Right. So there are 2 main kinds of voice recognition devices out there. Ones that process locally for a very limited set of commands, and others that process more natural speech. And those usually will interact with a cloud device. So for instance, let's take the Amazon Echo. If it's processing natural language commands and allowing that, that means it is uploading that data to Amazon for processing and then downloading the results for execution. But for instance, I know there are different home alarm systems that have voice recognition or allow voice commands. Those have a very predefined list of words and word combinations that they recognize.
So in those situations, like with the alarms, it's not actually even going out off premise.
No, it's staying on the device itself. But because it only handles a very limited set of commands, the amount of processing required is pretty small.
Well, so far, no questions about this. If you do have a question, go ahead and type it in the chat box. We do have a Cortana user who is chimed in. And as far as the usage, how much they offer, half of the people who responded, that use it, once or twice a day. Only one that has said multiple times a day. The other one has, once or twice a month. So,
Okay.
I will admit, I use the OK Google feature about a couple of times a day. And it's usually because I want to know what's going to be the fastest way to get to work and to open up Pandora, because I like listening to Pandora when I'm in the car.
Right, right. And I've used, for a variety of purposes, I've used the speech to text. We'll just leave it at that.
Yes, because you're a safe driver.
I am a very safe driver. I go by Philly rules.
Okay, a question came in, and we can I use Cortana only as a search box, never for voice. I think this is, I'm guessing this is probably on his Windows 10 computer.
Okay. So unless you've adjusted the privacy settings within Windows 10, which you can do now, and have a far greater degree of control since the anniversary update that happened, I think, about 2 months ago, that data is being shipped up to Microsoft for processing.
Because I think we were talking about earlier today, but prior to the anniversary update, Cortana is always listening, whether you realize it or not.
There were ways to turn it off, but there were a lot of questions about if that actually worked. Because some of the security researchers I know were finding when they did intercepts between a Windows 10 computer and Microsoft, basically put a computer in the middle to listen to all the traffic. They were still seeing a lot of traffic. They just couldn't tell what it was, going back and forth between the Windows 10 machine before and after the privacy settings were changed. Now, post-anniversary update, I haven't heard anything yet, but we can circle back on that another time. I know Microsoft took a lot of flack for the amount of data they were collecting from Windows 10.
Yeah, well, Microsoft tends to always take a lot of flack because of the decisions they make. And I'm not going to say they don't deserve it.
Well, so does Apple, so does Google. So, I mean,
yeah, they all do. Give it just a couple more minutes here for any more questions. Let's check and see if anyone else. We're still just 5 responses on our survey, which pretty good percentage with our viewers.
Okay.
And just keep in mind, if you have a topic that you would like Shawn to talk about, please let us know. You can email Shawn directly or email me. You can use our iso@apu.edu email address. There's a lot of ways you can reach out to us because we want to address the things that you're concerned about. And I hope that was okay. I just volunteered you for that, Shawn.
That's fine. No, and that's actually a great point, Holly. We do want to make sure the door is always open. If you have things that you would like us to look into and present here, I'm more than happy to do that. If there's questions we can answer, you heard something in the news or read it in the papers, just let me know, and we can either cover it one-on-one or I can cover it here.
Well, we still don't have any more questions, so I guess we can probably wind this down.
Okay.
I do want to remind everyone that today at 1 o'clock, we will be doing Hangout with IMT with Don Davis and Jeff Birch, another opportunity to ask questions. And so I know Shawn will have some good ones for them. So hopefully you'll have a chance. The email with the link will be going out, I think, right around 11:30 to 12:30. Sometime during the lunch hour. Unfortunately, they were only available at 1 o'clock today. So we take them when we can get them because they are both very busy guys. So
I've got my list.
Shawn's got his list. Next month, we're tentatively planning to talk about Windows Defender. Is that correct, Shawn?
Yep.
Unless something big breaks in our world of security, which can happen, unfortunately, we will talk about that in Microsoft's built-in protection, and is it any good?
Yeah, and I know one of the things I'm still looking into. We're still getting a number of complaints for people who are getting their taxes who were filed or attempted to be filed for them by parties unknown. And so far, a lot of that points back to the IRS breach back in 2014. At this point, we still do not have definitive numbers from the IRS about how many records were lost, but we know it's in the millions. So, and the IRS has been extremely not forthcoming with information about that breach.
Yeah. What can we say? It's frustrating, especially when they're not forthcoming, but they are the IRS and we're just us. So any parting questions, thoughts for us, Shawn, before we sign off?
Can I ask myself a question?
Sure.
That'd be kind of creepy.
Well, then I'll ask the question. Are you going to continue to use Google Now as an Android user?
I do, but I'm very thoughtful about what I use it for. I typically use it for a predefined set of commands. If I have something to search for, I search for it in a specific way. I do use speech to text in certain circumstances. but I'm also pretty thoughtful about when I use that too and what I use it for. So I think
Yeah.
a big thing is to be aware of what the tool is doing in the background. And for a lot of us, it's just a device. It's a black box. We don't know what's going on under the hood. For me, I like to understand what's going on under the hood so that I can make informed decisions about how I use it.
Yeah, and I think that's the bottom line, is making informed choices.
Right.
I hadn't thought about, until we had this conversation, about that information, those lookups or whatever, those commands being stored anywhere on any server. Just wasn't even a bleep on my radar. So it's good to think about.
You have no guarantee that they're even stored within U.S. borders.
Yeah.
So they could be in a data center in China for all we know.
And with that happy thought, we will go ahead and sign off. Thanks again for watching. And again, if you've got questions, ideas, shoot them our way. We'd love to hear from them. So have a great day.
All right. Thanks.